11 days after we buried my mother, I drove out to Sycamore Street to turn off her porch light and found a lockbox hanging on her front door. It was one of those gray realtor boxes, the kind with the rubber cuff that scuffs the paint. It was hooked over the handle my mother had polished every Easter for 41 years. In the grass by the mailbox, there was a for sale sign lying flat on its face, still zip-tied to its stakes, waiting for somebody to come back with a mallet. A man in a gray fleece was standing on the walk, taking photographs of the front of the house with his phone held sideways. I got out of the car and left the door open. "Can I help you?" He turned around and smiled the way people smile when they have absolutely no idea they are standing in the middle of something. "Oh, hi. Are you Mrs. Calloway?" "I'm Ruth Calloway." "Great. Perfect." He shifted his phone to his left hand and put out his right. "I'm just doing the exterior shots today. Tanya said you'd probably swing by. Your husband told her the key would be under the mat, but honestly, the light's better out here anyway." I did not shake his hand. "My husband told her," I said. "Yeah, Dale." He said it easily, the way you say the name of somebody you've already met. He's been great about getting us in. Behind him, above the door, my mother's porch light was still burning in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. It had been on since Thursday. It had been on, one way or another, since 1984. I want to be careful here, because when people tell stories like this, they usually skip to the part where they said the perfect thing. I didn't say anything perfect. I said, "There's been a mistake," in the voice I use at work when somebody double books an operating room, and the man in the fleece said, "Oh, okay, no problem. I'll give Tanya a call." And he walked to his car, and he left, and I stood on my mother's walk with my car door still hanging open and the engine still running. Then I went up the steps and turned off the porch light, because that was what I had driven out there to do. My mother's name was Eleanor Bram. She was 79. She died in her own bed on a Thursday morning in the first week of October, which she would have considered a personal victory, because she had told me at least twice a year for 2 decades that she had no intention of dying anywhere with fluorescent lighting. She had lived in the house on Sycamore Street since 1971. My father, Wendell, died on a state route outside Kenton in 1984 when I was 12, coming home late from a job in Bellefontaine. After that, my mother left the porch light on every single night. Not the lamp in the window. The porch light, the one over the door, the one that lights up the boards you actually have to stand on. I asked her about it once when I was maybe 15 and going through a phase of finding everything about her embarrassing. I said something like, "Mom, he's not coming home." And she said, "It's not for him." I said, "Then who's it for?" She said, "Anybody. Anybody coming home in the dark ought to be able to find the door." That was the entire conversation. She went back to her crossword. 41 years, every night, and the only explanation she ever gave me was 11 words long. I tell you this so you understand that when I say my husband listed my mother's house before her headstone arrived, I am not being dramatic about the timeline. The stone was ordered on the 6th. The engraver told us it would be 4 to 6 weeks because of the lettering my mother had specified, which was not a font anybody uses anymore. The lockbox went on the door on the 11th day. Dale got home from the warehouse a little after 6. I had not called him. I had thought about it the whole drive back, and what I kept landing on was that I did not want to hear his voice while I was on a highway, because I know myself, and I know that I would have spent the entire call finding a way to make it smaller. He came in through the garage, set his keys in the dish, and said, "There's mail on the porch." I said, "There was a lockbox on my mother's door." He stopped with his hand still on the strap of his lunch bag. And here is the thing I have gone over more times than I would like to admit, because it is the moment everything else in this story hangs from. He was not startled. He was not confused. His face did the thing a face does when a conversation you have already rehearsed arrives 4 days early. "Okay," he said. "So this is the wrong way to find out." "Find out what?" "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "Ruthie, don't." He set the lunch bag on the counter. "Tanya's a friend of Rick's. She does a pre-market thing where she gets the photos and the listing built before it goes live, so when you're ready, it's ready. It costs nothing. It commits us to nothing." He said the word nothing twice, and both times it landed like a man setting down something heavy. "I wasn't going behind your back. I was getting ahead of the work." "Getting ahead of the work," I said. "You've been dealing with the funeral home and the church and your mother's church ladies and the flowers, and I have watched you not sleep for 2 weeks. And I thought, at least this one thing I can take off her plate." I would like to tell you that I heard the lie in that. I didn't. Not that night. I have thought about why, and the honest answer is that it was a good lie, because 90% of it was true. I had been dealing with the church ladies. I had not been sleeping. He had watched me not sleep, and he had brought me tea at 11 at night. And once he had gotten up at 3 and sat with me at the kitchen table without saying anything, which is a real thing that a man did for me, and which I have not stopped counting just because of what came after. So what I said was, "Take it off the door. Consider it gone. Tonight. Tonight." And he did. He drove out there before dinner and came back with the gray box in his hand and set it on the counter where I could see it, like a man returning a wallet, and we ate leftover funeral ham, and I slept for 6 hours for the first time since the Thursday. I know how this sounds. I have had a long time to think about how it sounds. Here is what I want you to understand about the 11 days and about the next 4 months, and about the woman I was at the start of them. I was 54 years old. I had been married to Dale Calloway for 26 years. I scheduled operating rooms for a regional hospital system, which is a job where the entire skill is absorbing other people's emergencies without letting them collide. And I was extremely good at it. And I had not once noticed that I had been doing the same job at home for free. I did not know what my mother's house was worth. I want to be precise about that, because it is going to matter. I could have guessed. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a detached garage, a lot that backs onto the Kroger parking lot, in a town where the good news is that everything is cheap, and the bad news is the same sentence. If you had held a gun to my head that week, I would have said 180. I was wrong by about $60,000, and the reason I was wrong is that I had never asked. And the reason I had never asked is that my mother talked more openly about her rhododendrons than she ever talked about money. She did not talk about money because she had spent from 1984 to about 1996 not having any, and people who learn frugality that way do not treat it as a topic. They treat it as weather. I found out the number the way you find out most true things, which is by accident, in a hallway, from somebody who assumed you already knew. Marilyn Calloway, my mother-in-law, hosts Sunday dinner. She has hosted Sunday dinner since before I met her son, and she will host it after all of us are gone, out of spite, if nothing else. It is at 2:00. It is pot roast. If you arrive at 2:05, she will say, "Oh, we started," in a tone that has been sanding people down for 4 decades. That Sunday was the third one after the funeral. I almost didn't go. Dale said it would look strange if I didn't, and he was right, and I have noticed since then how often the right thing to do and the thing that looks strange are the same thing. Bonnie was already there. Bonnie is Dale's younger sister. She is 49 and she has a salon in a strip plaza out by the bypass, between a vape store and a place that has been coming soon for 3 years. She has had the salon for 11 years, and every single one of those years, she has been 8 weeks away from expanding into the unit next door. She hugged me at the door for a long time, the way people do when they want credit for the hug. "How are you?" she said. Not a question, a category. "I'm all right. You look thin." "I don't think I am." "You are. Doesn't she look thin, Mom?" Marilyn from the kitchen. "She looks tired." We sat. Rick carved. The pot roast was the pot roast. And somewhere around the second pass of the green beans, Bonnie said to the table, in the ordinary voice you would use to mention a dentist appointment, "So I talked to Kevin about the wall." Rick said, "Which wall?" "The wall. Between me and the vape place. He said it's not load-bearing, so it's basically just drywall and then a permit, and then it's one space." She put a green bean on her plate. "He quoted me 70. $70,000, I said. 70 for everything. Wall, floor, plumbing for 2 more bowls, the sign." She looked up at me and smiled. "It's a good number. He's doing it as a favor." I said, "Bonnie, that's a lot of money." And she said, and I want you to hear that there was nothing sharp in how she said it. That is the entire point. She said, "Well, it's family money." Nobody put a fork down. That's the detail I come back to, not what she said. That nobody at that table reacted, because nobody at that table heard anything that needed reacting to. Marilyn kept eating. Rick asked if the plumbing quote included the water heater. Dale, sitting on my left, close enough that I could feel his arm move, reached across me for the salt. I said, "Whose family?" Bonnie's smile got confused, not offended. Confused. "What?" "You said family money. Whose family?" And Marilyn said from the head of the table, not unkindly, which somehow made it so much worse, "Ruth, honey, it's all one family." I looked at my husband. Dale was salting his potatoes. I would like to report that I stood up. I passed the potatoes. That is what I did. I passed the potatoes to Rick, and I said, "There's a lot to sort out yet." And Marilyn said, "Of course there is." And Bonnie said, "Obviously no rush." And everyone went back to eating, satisfied that the matter had been raised and had gone well. On the drive home, Dale said, "That was a lot." I said, "Yes." He said, "Bonnie doesn't think before she talks." And I said, "She wasn't thinking. That's what bothered me. It was already decided somewhere, and she was just the one who said it out loud. Dale drove for about a mile. Then he said, "You're reading into it." The call from Harold Spear came on the Tuesday. I was at work in the little glass room where we do the surgical schedule, and I stepped out into the hallway by the vending machines because his name came up as a Marion number I didn't know. "Mrs. Calloway? Harold Spear. I did estate work for your mother." I knew the name the way you know a name from an envelope. Eleanor had mentioned a lawyer exactly once years earlier in the middle of a sentence about something else. "There are a few documents your mother wanted me to go through with you," he said. "I'd rather do it in person. Could you come in Thursday morning?" Yes, of course. I was already reaching for my planner, already in scheduling mode, which is the mode I go into when I don't know what else to be. "Dale can come with me. He's off Thursdays." There was a pause. Not a long one. Long enough that I looked at the vending machine. "Actually," Harold said, "your mother's instruction was that the first meeting be with you alone." I remember the hum of the machine. I remember that somebody's Cheetos had gotten stuck against the glass on the B row and had been there for a week, and everyone had been walking past it. I said, "Her instruction." "She was specific about it," he said. "She put it in writing." "I'm sorry. I know that's an odd thing to hear on a Tuesday." I said, No, that sounds like her." Which was true. And which was also the first moment in 11 days that I felt something other than tired. It was not relief, and it was not fear. It was the specific feeling of a door you have walked past 1,000 times turning out to be a door. Harold Spear's office was above a state farm on Center Street, up a staircase with a rubber runner. He was maybe 70, and he had the kind of tidy desk that tells you the man does not have very much left to do and is doing it properly. He did not start with the house. He started with a folder and he said, "Before anything else, I want you to understand the structure, because the structure is the whole thing." Then he told me that in the spring of 2023, my mother had moved the house on Sycamore Street into a revocable living trust. I said, "I don't know what that means." "It means that while she was alive, she could undo it any time she liked. She owned it, she controlled it, nothing changed." He turned the page. "On her death, by the terms she wrote, it became irrevocable. It's now the Eleanor Bram Family Trust. And what am I? You're the sole beneficiary of the trust. Income and, at the trustee's discretion, principal. So it's mine. The benefit is yours," he said. "The asset is the trust's." I remember trying to make that sentence do something in my head and failing. He said, "Let me put it plainly, because it's the part people care about and I don't like to make them wait for it. The house does not become marital property. It cannot be sold, borrowed against, or transferred by anyone except the trustees, and it is not reachable by any obligation of your husband's. Not now, not in a divorce, not in a bankruptcy, not in a judgment. Trustees," I said. "Plural." "You're one," Harold said. "Your daughter Nora is the other. Any sale requires both signatures." Nora is 24. She was, that autumn, 14 months into a job as a night nurse in the cardiac unit at the same hospital where I schedule operating rooms, which we both found funnier than it is. I said, "My mother made my daughter a trustee and didn't tell me?" "She told your daughter," Harold said. She was quite clear that she did not want you carrying it. Carrying what? He looked at me for a second over the top of his glasses. He had the expression of a man who has done this specific part of this specific job several hundred times and has never once enjoyed it. He said, "That's the letter." He slid a single sheet across the desk. Blocky capital letters, ballpoint, pressed hard enough to emboss the back. My mother wrote like every note might one day be entered into evidence. It said, "Ruth, if Harold is reading you this, I am already being difficult from somewhere else. The house is set up the way it is for one reason. You have never in your life been able to say no to someone who is sitting in front of you. That is not a flaw. It is why people call you. But I have watched you hand things over for 30 years and call it keeping the peace. So I have made it so that saying no is not up to you. It is the structure. When they ask, and they will ask, you can tell them your hands are tied. They are. I tied them. You are welcome." Mom, I read it 3 times in that office. The 3rd time I laughed, one of those laughs that comes out wrong, and Harold pushed a box of tissues an inch closer without looking up, which I think is the most tactful thing a man has ever done in my presence. "She was aware," he said, "that it might feel like she didn't trust you." "It doesn't," I said. "It feels like she was paying attention." Then he asked whether I wanted the appraisal figure now or later, and I said now, because I had learned about 11 days earlier that later is a thing other people do things during. He said, $241,000 as of March. I said, "For that house." "For that house," he said. "It's the lot, mostly. Commercial interest on that side of the block." I sat in my car in the State Farm parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. Here is what I did not do. I did not go home and put the letter on the counter and read it out loud. I have been asked about this. My daughter has asked me about this. What I did instead was, I went back to work, and I finished the Thursday schedule, and that night I opened my laptop and I started looking. And I have thought a lot about why, and the closest I can get is this. My mother had spent 3 years and a lawyer's fee building a fence around me, and the only useful question left was what was she building it against? The first thing I found took 4 minutes. Tanya Mullen's agency site had a coming soon page. Sycamore Street was on it. 14 exterior photographs, which meant the man in the gray fleece had been out there more than once. The copy said charming ranch on generous lot, motivated. Motivated. The listing had been created 8 days before my mother died. I want to be careful again, because this is the part where in a movie the woman throws a laptop. I checked the date 4 times. I found the little gray text that says, when a page was first indexed. I took a photograph of the screen with my phone, which is not a thing I had ever done in my life. And then I sat back and I thought with a kind of flat clarity that surprised me. There is going to be more, and I should stop finding it at 11 o'clock at night by myself. So I made a rule, and the rule was only in daylight, and write everything down. Over the next 9 days, I filled 14 pages of a legal pad. There was an email in our shared household account, the one we use for utilities and the vet, from Tanya, dated the 2nd week of September, thanking the Callaways for the walkthrough and saying she'd pulled comps for both properties. Both properties. There was a voicemail on our landline, which no one calls except Marilyn and the pharmacy, from a man named Kevin, saying he could do the demo the week of the 15th if the money was firm. There was a receipt in the truck for a storage unit in Prospect. Month to month. Started in August, and on the 9th day, in the online banking, I had not looked at closely in 2 years because Dale handled the mail for that account, and I had let him. I found a home equity line of credit against our own house, the house on Delaware Avenue, the one with our name on it, the one we still owe on. Opened in February, drawn down by $61,000 in March. My mother died in October. She had her fall in July. In February, she was still driving herself to the Y 3 mornings a week to walk the indoor track and complain about the temperature of the pool. I sat with that number for a day and a half before I understood what it actually told me. And when I understood it, I had to go out and stand in the driveway. It was not that he had taken money. We are married. It is our line of credit. He had every legal right to draw on it, and I had signed the papers when we opened it, in a kitchen, in a good mood, in 2019, to do a kitchen we never did. It was that he had spent it in March against a house that was not going to be available until my mother died. He had made a bet on the date. I called Nora that night. It was her stretch of nights, so we talked at 10 before she went in, which is her morning. I said, "Did Grandma tell you about the trust?" There was a long pause, and then my daughter said, in a completely different voice than the one she had said hello in, "Oh, thank God. Nora, I've had that in my chest for 2 years, Mom." 2 years? She made me promise. She said if I told you, you'd give it away to be nice. My daughter took a breath. Her exact words were, "Ruth will hand it over and call it love." I stood in my own kitchen and did not say anything. "Mom, was she wrong?" I said, "No." I did not go to Dale with any of it for 4 more days, and I want to be honest about why. Because the honest reason is not flattering. It was not strategy. It was that as long as I hadn't said it out loud, there was still a version of the last 8 months where I had misunderstood something, and I wanted to stay inside that version for a little longer, the way you stay in a hot bath after the water has started to turn. The thing that ended it was a legal pad. It was in the console of his truck, under the tire gauge and a church bulletin. I was looking for the tire gauge. I want that on the record. I was looking for the tire gauge because the light had come on, and I opened the console, and there it was. And I read it standing in a Kroger parking lot with the driver's door open and my leg still inside the car. At the top, in Dale's handwriting, which slants hard to the right and has not changed since he was 19, Sycamore, after, and then a list. Bonnie, 70, wall/build-out, Mom, 40, roof plus get her out of that Buick. Wuss, 90, kill the Hellock, breathe, hold back, 30, Rick, see if he'll take 10 to do the floor himself, 240. Against an appraisal of 241. He had spent the whole thing. He had spent all of it in a spiral notebook, down to the last $1,000, and then he had gone to work. And at the bottom of the page, on its own line, a little apart from the numbers, as if it had been added later, Ruth. Talk to her after the funeral. She'll be softer. I stood there long enough that a woman loading groceries 2 spaces over asked me if I was all right. I said, "Yes, thank you, because I am who I am." Then I photographed all 4 pages, put the pad back exactly where it had been, closed the console, checked the tire, and went in and bought the milk I had come for. I told him on a Saturday morning at our own kitchen table with coffee, because I had decided that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it in daylight and sitting down. I said, "I'm not selling my mother's house." Dale looked up, and this is the part I still think about at stoplights. He was not angry. Anger would have been a kind of respect. He was patient. He put down his phone, and he arranged his face into the expression of a man about to walk somebody through something, and he said, "Okay, talk to me about that." "There's nothing to talk about. I'm not selling it." "Ruthie, we don't have to decide today." "I have decided today. You've had 11 days. 26 days. You've had 26 days. You haven't slept, and you're making a permanent financial decision in the middle of grief, which is exactly what everybody says not to do." He said it kindly. He said everything kindly. "I'm not asking you to sell it this month. I'm asking you not to close a door in October that you'd want open in March." And I said, "How much is the haylock balance?" I watched it land. It took about half a second, and I saw it go through him the way you see a wave go under a dock. He said, "That's separate." "How much?" 61 and change. "What did you spend it on, Dale?" He said, "Bonnie was going to lose the lease." There it was, just like that. No fight for it. He had been carrying it for 8 months, and when the door opened even an inch, he came out of it almost gratefully. And I have thought since then that men like my husband do not lie because they are brave. They lie because nobody has ever asked them a direct question in a flat voice. "You gave your sister $61,000. I loaned it. In March. In March. Against our house. Against equity we're not using. While my mother was walking the track at the Y." And Dale said, and I want to give him this, because it is the truest thing he said in the entire 4 months. He said, "I didn't think it would take this long." We sat there. I want to describe what that was like, and the only honest way I can put it is that it was not like a bomb going off. It was like a floor being described to you. The floor had been there the whole time. Somebody had just finally said out loud what it was made of. I said, "Say the rest of it." There is no rest of it. I put my phone on the table, face up, with the photograph of the legal pad on the screen. He looked at it for a while. Then he said, "That's not a plan. That's me thinking. Ruth, talk to her after the funeral. She'll be softer." "That's not, Ruthie, that's shorthand. That's me writing to myself. It's shorthand for something. For the fact that you were going to be more open to a conversation after than during. Which is true. Which is kind, actually, if you—" "Dale." He stopped. I said, "You wrote down what I was worth to you in the same handwriting you used for the roof." He didn't answer that. And then he said the sentence that ended the marriage, although neither of us knew it that morning, and it was not a cruel sentence, which is why it worked. He said, "It's not like you were ever going to do anything with it." The next 11 days, everybody called. Marilyn first on the Sunday from her landline at 8:40 in the morning, which is her hour for calls that she has been thinking about since 6. "I hear there's some confusion about the house." "There isn't any confusion. Bonnie's very upset. I'm sure. Ruth." A pause, and then, in the voice she uses at church, "You've never had to worry about money." I said, "Marilyn, I've worried about money my whole life." "You've never had to worry about it alone," she said. "That's what a family is." and I would hate for you to find out what it's like." I hung up and put the phone on the counter and looked at it for a while, because it had taken me 40 seconds to notice that my mother-in-law had threatened me, and it had been said so warmly that I'd almost thanked her. Bonnie didn't call. Bonnie sent photographs. The first was the lease. She had signed it. Both units, 5 years, her signature at the bottom in the loopy hand she has had since high school. Sent at 11:14 p.m. with no message. The second, 4 minutes later, was the front of the salon with the paper still taped in the window that said, "Coming soon. Double the space, double the love." The third, the next morning, was a text. "I signed in September." Because I was told. That one I read maybe 20 times, and every time it got worse, because I was told is the sentence of somebody who has also been used. Rick called once. He said, "Hey, Ruth, listen, I'm not in this." And then he stayed on the line for a second too long, and he said, "For what it's worth, I told her not to sign until it was real money." And I said, "Thank you, Rick." And I meant it, and we have not spoken since. Deb called on the Wednesday. Deb has been my friend since we were both 23 and pregnant at the same OB. She is the person I call. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which took 11 minutes. And then she said, "Okay, so what if you gave them 20? I said, "What? 20,000 out of the..." However that trust thing works. You give Bonnie 20, it's not 70, it's not nothing, and it stops. Ruthie, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying you have to live in that family at Christmas for the next 30 years, and I have watched you at Christmas." And I said, "Deb, if I give them 20, what am I buying?" She said, "Peace." I said, "For how long?" Deb didn't answer that for a while. Then she said, "Yeah, okay. Yeah." That is the most useful conversation I had in 4 months, and my friend and I both knew it about 90 seconds after it ended, and neither of us has ever brought it up again. Nora came over on a Saturday, and we sat on my back steps, and she said something I have repeated to 3 different women since. She said, "Mom, they're not asking you for money. They already spent it. They're asking you to make it okay that they spent it." And I said, "That's a hard way to put it." And my daughter, who is 24 and who works 12-hour nights putting monitors on people's grandfathers, said, "It's a hard thing they did." I heard the rest of it from the garage. It was a Thursday in the second week of November, and I had gone out to the deep freeze for a bag of corn. The door between the garage and the kitchen does not latch unless you pull it, and I had not pulled it, and Dale was on the phone at the workbench with his back to me. He said, I know I did." Then he said, "Bon, I shouldn't have promised you before it was mine to promise." I stood there with the freezer lid up and the cold coming out of it. Bonnie said something. I could hear the shape of it, not the words. And Dale said, "Give it till after the holidays." And then, "She'll come around. She always does." I closed the freezer, which made a sound, and he turned around and we looked at each other across a garage for what was probably 2 seconds. He said, "Ruth." I said, "I know." And I went inside and put the corn on the counter and stood there and understood something that had taken me 26 years and a legal pad to arrive at. He was not lying to his sister. That was the honest version. That was Dale telling the truth to the person he tells the truth to. She'll come around. She always does. He was not describing a hope. He was describing my record. Marilyn's birthday is the 22nd of November. She turned 78. It is always at her house, and there are always about 25 people because Marilyn counts. I went. Deb asked me later why I went, and the answer is that I had spent 5 weeks having this conversation one person at a time on the telephone, and every single one of those conversations had ended with somebody telling me what somebody else had said, and I had scheduled operating rooms for 19 years. And there is a thing you learn in that job. When 6 departments are each waiting on the other 5, you stop calling them and you put them in a room. I brought a folder. It was a plain manila folder, and it had 4 things in it, and I had made 3 copies, which is the detail that tells you I was not as calm as I looked. I waited until after the cake. That was deliberate. Whatever else happened, Marilyn was going to get her cake. Bonnie brought it up herself, which I had thought she might. She was at the end of the counter with a paper plate, and she said, "To no one and to everyone." So are we allowed to talk about Sycamore yet? Or is that still off limits? The room did the thing rooms do, and I said, "Yes, let's." I put the folder on the counter and I opened it, and I did not make a speech, because I had practiced a speech in the car for 40 minutes and had thrown it away in the driveway. I said, "This is the listing for my mother's house. It was created on the 28th of September. My mother died on the 9th of October." Nobody said anything. "This is a storage unit in Prospect, rented in August in Dale's name." Rick set his drink down. "This is Bonnie's lease, signed the 11th of September. Bonnie said, "Ruth." "And this," I said, "is a home equity line of credit against the house on Delaware Avenue, opened in February, $61,000 drawn in March." I put my finger on the date because I wanted it to be a physical thing in the room. "March," I said. "My mother had her fall in July." And Marilyn Calloway, 78 years old, in her own kitchen with a cake behind her, said, "Dale, what does she mean, March?" That is the moment, not mine, hers. I have replayed that night probably 400 times, and the thing I keep landing on is that I did not get the moment. I got about 11 seconds of a room going quiet. Marilyn got the moment, and she got it because she was the only person there who had genuinely not known, and she found out standing up in front of her sister-in-law and 2 neighbors and a grandson. Dale said, "Mom, it's not." She said, "Don't." Bonnie was crying. Not strategically. Bonnie, I have come to believe, was the second most lied to person in that kitchen, and the difference between us is that she got a lease out of it and I got a legal pad. Somebody's grandson asked if there was more cake. I said, "There's a copy for each of you," which sounds cold when I write it down, and I have decided to stop apologizing for it. Then I got my coat. Rick walked me out. At the car, he said, "That was..." And then he couldn't find the end of the sentence, and he said, "Drive safe, Ruth." Nobody was arrested. Nobody threw anything. My mother-in-law did not fall to her knees. 2 neighbors went home confused and told people a garbled version for a month. That is what it actually looks like. The next 4 months were paperwork, and I am going to tell you about them, because every story like this ends at the kitchen, and I think that is a lie by omission. I changed the locks at Sycamore Street on the 1st of December. It cost $190 and took the man 40 minutes, and when he left, I sat on my mother's porch steps in a coat and felt rude. That is the part nobody warns you about. Not guilt. I did not feel guilty. I had earned that lock. Rude. 26 years of being the person who makes things smooth does not come off with a deadbolt. The HELOC did not go away because my husband turned out to be a disappointment. $61,000 of marital debt secured against the house I actually live in, and every dollar of it in a strip plaza out by the bypass. My lawyer, I got one in January, a woman named Priya who charges $325 an hour and is worth $600, explained to me that the trust was airtight and the HELOC was mine as much as his, and that these two facts were unrelated, and that unrelated facts is most of what the law is. We separated in February. Not dramatically. He took the truck and the good ladder and moved into a unit in the same complex where Bonnie's stylist lives, which in Marion, Ohio, is a form of public announcement. We did 4 sessions with a counselor before that, and I want to say one honest thing about them. Dale tried. In the 3rd session, he said, without being led to it, I made promises with her money because I didn't think of it as hers yet. He said it out loud, in front of a stranger, and he did not soften it, and I watched him mean it. And I sat there and understood something that I wish I had understood at 30. Somebody becoming sorry is not the same as somebody becoming different. Sorry is a feeling. Different takes years, and it has to be spent on somebody, and I had already spent mine. Here is where everybody landed because I think you have earned the arithmetic. Bonnie's salon closed in August, not because of me. She had signed a 5-year lease on 2 units on the strength of money that was never going to arrive, and she carried it for 9 months on credit cards, and then she didn't. She works at a chain place in the mall now, and she is, by every account I get secondhand, good at it and busy and making more than she made in the last 2 years of owning her own place, which is a joke the universe told at her expense, and which I do not find funny. Bonnie and I have not spoken. I have thought about calling her. What stops me is not anger. It's that I do not know what I would be calling to say, and I have gotten suspicious of conversations I can't name in advance. Marilyn wrote me twice. The first letter I did not open for 6 weeks. It sat on the hall table and I moved it when I dusted. The second one came in April, and I opened them both on the same afternoon, in order like a person reading a chapter. The first one asked me to think about the family. The second one said, and I am quoting because I have it in a drawer, I keep going back to that kitchen. I have been angry at you for months because it is easier than being angry at him. That is not fair, and I am too old to pretend I don't know it. She did not apologize. She did not ask for anything. I have never in 26 years received a more honest piece of writing from that woman, and I wrote her back a short note, and we exchange short notes now, 4 or 5 times a year, and that is exactly the right amount. Dale and I finalized in October, a year and a day after my mother died, which no one planned and which the county clerk did not find remarkable. He pays half the HELOC. He is on time. He got a promotion in the spring, and he told Nora about it before he told me, which is correct. And the house on Sycamore Street. I did not sell it. I also did not move into it, which surprised people and which surprised me. I sat on those steps a lot that winter trying to decide, and what I finally understood is that my mother did not leave me a house. She left me a decision, and she made sure I would be strong enough to be the one making it. Moving in would have been a way of handing it back to her. Nora and I spent that summer on the porch, not renovating, repairing. 6 boards, 2 rails, and $110 of paint that took 4 weekends because we are both slow and we were both, I think, in no hurry to be done. There is a nurse named Adaisy who rents it now. She has a 7-year-old named Michael. She is on nights like Nora, and she pays under the market, and I have never once mentioned that to her. When they moved in, I showed her the breaker box and the trick with the back door, and then I showed her the switch by the front door, and I said, "This is the porch light. I'd like it left on." She said, "All night?" I said, "All night." She said, "Okay," and she has never asked me why, and every time I drive down Sycamore after dark it is on, and I have never told her what it costs me to see that, because it would embarrass us both. I asked my mother once who the light was for, and she said, "Anybody. Anybody coming home in the dark ought to be able to find the door." I was 15, and I thought it was a sad thing to say about a dead man. I was 54 before I understood she wasn't talking about my father at all. She had been talking for 41 years about the door being findable, about the fact that a person who is out in the dark should not also have to guess. That is what she did with the trust. She did not protect a house. She left a light on for a woman she knew was going to be out in the dark in about 3 years, and she made it bright enough that I could not miss it, because she also knew that I would try to be polite about it. 11 days after we buried my mother, I drove out to Sycamore Street to turn off her porch light and found a lockbox hanging on her front door. My husband thought grief would make me softer. He wrote it down, in a spiral notebook, in his own handwriting, in the same list as the roof. He was wrong. Not because I turned out to be hard. I didn't. I passed the potatoes. I let a man photograph my mother's house. I sat at a table and said nothing while a woman called my inheritance family money, and I would probably do the first 2 again. He was wrong because my mother had already answered the question 3 years earlier in an office above a state farm, and all I ever had to do was be the kind of woman who would stand still long enough to read what she left me. If you have spent 30 years being the person who keeps the peace, and you are starting to notice that peace and respect are not the same thing, I think you already know what this story was about. Thank you for spending this time with me and for letting me tell you about my mother, who would have hated every minute of this and would have listened to all of it. If this story reminded you of someone you love, someone who gives in to keep a room calm, someone who has been called difficult for saying no once, I'd be grateful if you shared it with them. Sometimes it is easier to hear it in somebody else's kitchen than your own. And if you'd like to stay for more stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet strength it takes to stop handing things over, I'd be honored if you subscribed and came back for the next one. Until then, leave a light on for somebody, including yourself.